So the first letter we're looking at is S for specific. S is for specific. So basically what this means is that when we're looking at outcomes, they need to be specific. If they're woolly, then it's going to be very, very difficult to understand what we're actually looking at for progress. And the whole idea of an outcome is being able to monitor, address and record what progress a child is making. And to be able to do that, it needs to be specific enough. Quite often local authorities, when they have several reports where professionals have mentioned or indicated several different outcomes, they'll try and merge all of these outcomes into this huge gigantic one outcome that then becomes really woolly and non-specific and really, really hard to actually work out and understand what we're actually looking at in terms of progress and what we're actually trying to achieve. Measurable. So measurable, which M is for measurable. What we mean by measurable is, in order for us to understand whether a child's making progress, the outcome's got to be measurable. We've got to be able to sit down and say, we can see X amount of progress, or young person's able to do X thing in so many times, so we can measure and understand what progress is being made, if any, and if progress is not being made, we can then start to understand what it is that's not working or what it is that needs to change, so then we are making progress. So each point that we talk about today is about being able to actually understand what progress a child or young person's making, which is then going to inform how we move forward. And also, if a child's not making progress, we can then understand why that's not being made and try and address that. A is for achievable, which is super important. You know, and quite often I hear local authorities going on about how outcomes need to be, I said the word earlier as well, ambitious. But we need to make sure that we are actually asking a child to progress forward. And I agree, fully agree with that. But I think sometimes it's too ambitious. What we need to do is to make sure that whatever we're putting in place is achievable as well. You know, we don't want to keep putting so for example, when we look at time bound later on, we'll talk about like at end of key stage. So if, for example, we put at end of key stage 1 a particular outcome that we're looking at to be a child to be able to reach and make the progress needed to, you know, to say that we've achieved that outcome. You know, if it's not made, then local authorities just change it to end at next key stage. But then, to me, that's not indicating that the outcome in the first place is not achievable. That maybe the outcome that we've put there, and we're not saying it's never achievable, it's just that that wasn't achievable at that time within the time that was allocated for it to be achievable. Therefore, we need to take a step back, and maybe it's just that we need to simplify that outcome a little bit, so then was it achievable in the right time, and then the next time we come to review for the next key stage, that we actually make the outcome you know, a little bit more challenging. Another thing I'll look at later on, because this is probably not making too much sense at this stage, but when we look at later on, we'll look at how we can step up an outcome and step down an outcome. So basically that means if we've got, for example, a child who's had what you might term as about emotionally based school avoidance. Everybody terms them different, I understand that. So what might be termed as EBSA, emotionally based school avoidance. So what a child might have been out of education for two years. So it wouldn't be an achievable outcome to say that school child's then going to attend full-time school straight off if you found a school that's suitable and able to, because the child's going to need transition. And it may take a year or so before the child's even able to attend for 30% of the time, for example. So the outcome to begin with might be, you know, by the end of the year, the academic year, the child's attending 30% of the time. Once that's achieved, then we can move it on to the next stage. Maybe the next outcome would be they can attend for 75% of the time. It's all about making sure that we're putting goals in for our children and young people that are achievable, that are showing that we are making progress and that provision is working. Realistic. Also, again, being realistic on what we know children can achieve. It's great to be ambitious. It's, you know, and I often hear local authorities talk about parents being negative. We're not. Quite often, parents are just being realistic on what a child can achieve. It is our job as parents, as support to our children and young people, to make them feel empowered, to make them feel their self-esteem grow and their confidence grow. And to do this, we need to be realistic on what we are setting as targets. We need to be realistic on what we know that our children and young people can achieve. Time bound. So we're looking at outcomes and time bound, and we're looking, and the reason we have time bound outcomes is so then we just don't set a target and it's forever ongoing. We're actually reviewing progress, and we're actually reviewing whether provision is working. So an outcome is there for two reasons. It's to review progress and to review whether the provision in an EHCP plan is working. And if for whatever reason we are not making outcomes by the end of the time specified that the child or young person should be able to. So for example, if an outcome isn't realistic, too ambitious, and it states that it should be met by end of year key stage 1 and it's not, then obviously it was wrong. It wasn't the right target to be in place, you know. And the reason we have it time bound is so then it's not a continuous just, you know, not met. We're constantly evaluating why it's not met. Is there a reason? Was it too ambitious? Was it realistic? Is it the provisions not met? So each point in the SMART acronym is there for a reason, and it's super, super important it's there. And it's all about making sure that we are working in the best interest of a child and working forward. And to be able to do that and to be able to measure progress and ensure that provision is right, it's really important that outcomes are SMART. So they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time bound. I am going to do a Bitesize on the golden thread, but I just wanted to mention at this stage that for the golden thread, so that's for provision, for needs to be identified, provision to support the needs, and then outcomes to be tied in as in we are showing what progress is made, then it's really, really important that outcomes are strong and outcomes are smart. So what we're looking at, what a smart outcome may look at, and this is where you'll start to understand a bit more what I mean by that, developing outcomes. So what, for example, it says XXX obviously because I'm not talking about a specific person, but at this stage we're going to call them Bob. So by the end of key stage 1, Bob will have initiated conversation with a peer with support from an educational staff on at least 2 occasions. So there what we're looking at is that with support from another adult, Bob can initiate conversations with on 2 occasions. It's smart, so it's specific. It tells you exactly what we need to achieve. It's measurable because it's on 2 occasions that we can measure that this has been made. It's achievable, you know. It's well within what Bob's capabilities are, and with that support and that provision we can then develop him to get to this stage where he's achieved it. It's realistic. So we're asking with support, we're not asking too much of Bob, and we're able to show progress with whatever Bob's doing. And it's time bound, so it's end of key stage 1, and it's a realistic time bound as well. Once that's achieved, we could then look at developing the outcome. So then it could be by the end of key stage 2, Bob will have initiated conversation with a peer on at least 2 occasions. So we've removed the need for support and we're looking at Bob doing it more independently. So it's like we're not asking too much at each stage of Bob. They're all realistic and they're all really achievable. But we are asking enough that it's ambitious for him. So that is the kind of, and I get that's just one example, but it'd be impossible to give you loads and loads of examples. But if anybody needs any more like ideas on outcomes, then please do feel free to contact us. Examples of outcomes that are not smart. So Bob will make academic progress. So how do we measure that? You know, progress is in specific areas. It's not specific enough. It's so broad that it could mean anything. It could be such a long-term progress and it's so broad that he never makes it, or it could be even switch the other way where they say, oh, he's made progress in maths, therefore he's made academic progress. He's met it straight away. So it's not smart, it's not realistic, it's not achievable, it's not time bound. It's just not going to work in the context we need it to in an EHCP. The same with Bob will make friends. Again, it's broad, it's not specific, it's not measurable, it's not achievable, not time down and not realistic. So I'm not saying that it's not achievable per se, because yes, we could say that Bob's made a friend today, that's achieved. However, when we talk about making friends, it's not so simple as just making friends, is it? It's about maintaining friendships as well. So in that aspect, that outcome is too woolly and too broad for what we need in an EHCP. Bob will access support. This can borderline onto provision as well. So sometimes we have to be super careful that what outcomes are in are actual outcomes and it's not actual provision. Because at the end of the day, sometimes local authorities will change provision to be outcomes, as in support that's not needed and it's what the child needs to do and that's not correct. But again, it's too broad. What does accessing support mean? It means nothing, doesn't it? If there's a person in class that is there and able to support, and that and Bob's visiting the vicinity, the school could turn around and say they've accessed support because that person's there. Because it's not specific enough, it's so broad, there's nothing to measure it by either. It's not achievable, because let's be honest, how do we rate that it's achievable? It's not really realistic or time bound either. Bob will attend school. If I go back to my example on a child that might have EBSA, who's not been in school for a while, they might be able to go and visit a school for an hour, and then not be able to do it again for quite some time. Technically, they've attended school, so technically in one aspect that outcome would be met, but when we look at what we're actually looking at in the grand scheme of things, the needs of the child, it's not a smart outcome. It's too woolly, it's not measurable, it's not achievable as such, it's not realistic, and it's not time bound in the context of supporting that person with more long-term attendance at school. Bob will speak to others. Again, it's not smart, it's not specific, not measurable, not achievable, not realistic, and not time bound. I am aware that these are quite simple examples, and sometimes it's like, for example, the local authority have merged 3 outcomes, like the Bob will make friends, the Bob will make access support, and Bob will speak to others. They might merge that all into one big outcome that's even woollier and makes even less sense. So it's kind of that kind of outcome that we're looking at that doesn't really work in the EHCP, and it's fundamental to that EHCP proving progress and moving forwards that outcomes are smart, that outcomes are reflective and are realistic and achievable for our children, to measure that progress. Because if we cannot measure that progress, we do not know if provision's working, we do not know if our children are actually in the right placements. So it's really, really important. So even though outcomes aren't appealable and outcomes aren't really talked about a lot, they're actually really, really important, and they're one of those like building bricks of the EHCP that if it's not right, the whole thing's not right. So it's really, really important that we actually make sure that our outcomes are smart.